Good?
Yeah.
Hey everybody, I'm Jesse Taylor, and today I'm going to refute Nicholas Takamori's claim that marijuana is good for the economy. I'm going to do so by going over his major claims that he made during his presentation and explaining what I see wrong with either of those claims or how I would refute them. The three claims that I'm going to be going over are: one, that there is an industry and market for marijuana in the United States; two, that there are savings and taxation that the United States can benefit from; and three, that there is job creation through legalizing marijuana. The first claim, there is an industry and market for marijuana in the United States. Mr. Takamori, he expressed that there's a $35 billion industry, potentially, in the United States, and that 10% of the population has used marijuana in the last year, and 15% of the population uses it daily. I had an issue with this, as the numbers don't exactly match up. You have 10% of the population that's used marijuana within the last year, but 15% of the population uses it on a daily basis. At most, if you stand by the 10% of the population use marijuana in the last year, you could potentially only have 10% of the population that uses it on a daily basis. On these grounds alone, I cannot accept this statement as it's not factually correct and or mathematically possible. The second claim is that there are savings and taxations that the United States can benefit from. The express claims was that the United States can possibly save $13.7 billion in the enforcement of prohibition and $6.4 billion in sales tax. However, both of these statements were written by Jeffrey Miron, and he's an economics professor at Harvard University. The problem I had with this is I went and I looked at Professor Miron's report, and it came up that he was sponsored by the Marijuana Policy Project, which is an interest group who also supplied the data that he was writing about. I found this quite problematic, and I actually found a quote from Dr. Robert DuPont. He's the former president of the National Institute for Behavior and Health and the former director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And he has an analogy that he likes to use for anything that is made, or anything that is made from being illegal to legal, and that's the analogy of legalized gambling. Once gambling became legalized, it did not reduce illegal gambling in the United States, rather it increased it. Using the same analogy, I'd like to propose that if marijuana is legalized, there's still going to be a market for illegal marijuana, along with, since there's a market for illegal marijuana, you're still going to have costs for enforcing the legalization of marijuana. So although if marijuana were legalized and there were no issues, we could save $13.7 billion. Realistically, though, it won't even come close to that. The third and final claim that I would like to refute is that there is some sort of job creation by legalizing marijuana. The express claim is that there's 14 different job types, a 3,000% job growth in the current medical marijuana field in Montana. However, this is in Montana, and this is the only example that I came across where there are numbers talking about how there is some sort of job creation in legalization of marijuana. This was included in an article written by Ted Cox, and when I went to go look at this article for this information, it was part of an introductory statement to the rest of the paper that Ted Cox is writing, and I found that it was cited as a survey from Indeed.com, which is a job site. However, when I went to go look for the survey, I couldn't find anything. So I cannot confirm or deny whether this statistic is true, because it doesn't seem to exist in a place where I can find it. In conclusion, the evidence above, or the evidence I talked about earlier, does not prove that marijuana is good for the economy. Simply because the evidence does not prove that claim, I cannot accept the major claim that marijuana is good for the economy, and I hope you will not either.
All right, well, you're pretty specific about challenging the grounds that the advocate is using, suggesting that there are problems with the evidence in several places. I think you have an excellent preview of what the supporting points are, and as you signpost in the body of the speech, it's very easy to follow. I think that you could use a little bit of information to support some counterclaims on some of those points instead of just relying on your challenges to the evidence to undermine support for the advocate's claim. On the first point, the inconsistency between the two statistics, I think, does do some damage there, but the notion that this is going to be a substantial or important economic product, I think, needs to be developed a little bit more rather than just talking about the inconsistency on that data. So I appreciate the challenge that you've got there, but this is a place where maybe some counter information would be useful. On the argument on savings, I do think you have a pretty good explanation, and there is a counter argument here that there are going to be increased costs that go along with it. I think you need to be a little bit clearer. For instance, it's not just that legalized gambling increased the amount of gambling, but it increased costs associated with gambling, and that's the thing that we need to see so that we can make the analogy that you were making here, that we're still going to have costs. A simple explanation of that, for instance, might be that in order to restrict access to adults, there's still going to have to be some enforcement technique, and in order to be able to do the taxing, there has to be some regulation of the economic aspect, and all of those things cost money. And I think that if you gave that explanation, that argument would be a little bit stronger. I did like the challenge that you had on the advocate's evidence on this particular point, suggesting that it comes from a source that is somewhat biased, and in fact that source used data that was generated by a group specifically designed to create legalization of marijuana. I think that that's a reasonable press there. Again, some counter evidence on that point would strengthen it. The one thing that you have is okay, but it's not specific to marijuana itself. And if you had any examples of places where it was legalized and there were increased costs or problems associated with marijuana legalization, that would be a good place to put them in. On the job creation thing, basically it comes down to you couldn't really find the evidence. It's located in a very specific place, and you're not sure it's generalizable, and there's no way to check it. Those are good presses to have, and they're reasonable to make. I think there's some other things that you might want to talk about. For instance, job growth, 3,000% in Montana. Well, since we don't have any data on what that really constitutes, maybe you could create a hypothetical to illustrate that it's really pretty simple. If there's one job currently in Montana distributing medical marijuana, and suddenly we're going to be opening up 30 clinics as a consequence of this, well, that's a 3,000% increase, but that's not a huge number of jobs. That's 29 additional jobs for the entire state of Montana. That would be maybe a way to undermine the generalization that's being presented on top of the criticisms that you have, although I think they're pretty good criticisms. Like I said, it was relatively easy to follow, and the structure was fine. I just think you need to do a little bit extra research on this to find some counterclaims to go along with the presses that you have. All right, thank you.